Hello, welcome, or welcome back if you're not new. Today I am doing my May wrap-up, and this wrap-up is basically everything that is not part of my Century Reading Challenge. For those of you who don't know what my Century Reading Challenge is I am reading a book published every single year from 1900 to 2020, which rounds out to about 10 books a month. So I will cover a little bit of that, but there are separate videos for that, and I will put that playlist up in the corner right there. So first off, I read 7,285 pages this month, which is, as far as pages go, my biggest reading month of the year so far. I read 19 books and averaged about 383 pages per book. 12 of those 19 books were sci-fi, so I'm a tiny little bit sci-fi'd out since sci-fi was never my favorite genre to begin with. 2 of the books I read this month were from the 1930s, and I will link that wrap-up right up there. 10 of the books that I read were from the 1940s, and I just finished that wrap up. I will also link it up there. The next book I read was my monthly book club book, and for this I read Aurora Rising by Amie Kaufman and Kristoff. This was one of the sci-fi books that I read, and I actually really enjoyed this book. Basically, it's futuristic, set in space, and there is a space academy, which is kind of a policing force. In this universe, squads are made up of 6 people. You have the Alpha, who is the head of the squad, the leader, and you have an Ace, who is your pilot. You have a Face, who is your diplomat. You have a Tank, that is your martial artist type of bodyguard person. You have a Brain, which is your scientist / doctor, and you have a Gearhead, who is your engineer. And everybody in this school fits into one of those categories, and going into your last year, the Alphas get to go through a draft and choose their squad. Well, Tyler, who is one of the main characters, all 6 of these people are really main characters, but Tyler, who is one of the main characters, is the best Alpha of his class. He has first draft picked. He is going to have an amazing squad, but he's still nervous because it's a nervous type situation. And the night before he goes out in a spaceship for a flight just to kind of clear his head, and hears a distress signal from a ship that has been missing for over 200 years. And he gets to the ship. It is being destroyed by a storm, an electrical storm. It's on fire, and basically everybody who's in cryogenic sleep is dead except for one person. So Tyler goes and rescues Aurora, who is the girl on the cover of this, as the one person who is not dead yet. And she has been in cryogenic sleep for 200 years when she should have only been asleep for 12 years or something like that. 2 years, barely any time at all. So he saves her, but in order to save her, he misses the draft, and he's kind of stuck with the people that no one wanted. And it's kind of the story of the Misfit Squad and Aurora's adventure. It was really good in a non-literary type of way. It was a fun story, it was well written, it was fast-paced, but this isn't like any sort of like literary genius. If you've watched Firefly, you know this story already. It's very, very similar to Firefly, but I love Firefly, so I really, really enjoyed this, and I'm very much looking forward to reading the next book in this series. Next up, I was finishing out the nominees for the Nebula Awards this month because the Nebula Awards happened on May 30th. And the only book that I hadn't read out of the 6 novel nominations was Fire with Fire by Charles E. Gannon. It was the first book in the series. The actual nominated book was the Marque of Caine, which was the 5th book in the series, so I just read the first in the series to get a feel for the series. I'm not really going to talk about this because I made a whole video about the Nebula Awards, and I'll link it up there in the eye. All of these things that I'm linking in the eye, I'll also put in the comments so you can find them there as well. Next up, the Asian Readathon happened this month. I only managed to get 3 out of the 4 books that I had planned to read, but we'll talk about the 3 books that I did read. First off was the group book Little Fires Everywhere by Celeste. I ended up getting this in time, and I read it, and it was okay. I'm not really a huge fan of contemporary, so it was just not my genre, but I did enjoy reading it. It's about basically 2 families. You have the perfect, wealthy, white family who plans out their entire life and lives everything by a code of this is what you should do with your life. And the mother of that family owns a rental house that her parents gifted her as a way to earn extra income, and she doesn't need the extra income, so she keeps it fairly low rent and rents it out to people that she feels like she's giving charity to. And it covers the wealthy white family and the single mother and daughter who live in this rental house. And you have like the drama between the teenagers, you have the drama between the adults, you have outside drama, and it's a very interesting but drama-filled story. This takes place in the late 90s, early 2000s, I would say. It's very interesting because the teenagers in this book are my age. So I was a teenager in the late 90s, early 2000s. So a lot of the stuff that they were talking about is very relevant to my experiences in high school. Like I said, it was interesting, and if you like contemporary, I think this is probably a fantastic read for you. I'm just not the biggest contemporary fan. Next up, I read Anna K by Jenny Lee, and holy shit, this book. Another contemporary, but this is a young adult contemporary that I assume, or I've been told, it is a retelling of Anna Karenina, but I haven't read Anna Karenina, so I can't like really speak to how good of a retelling this is. I can tell you that this is a bunch of wealthy teenagers in New York City, and I'm talking like Gossip Girl wealthy. It's very similar to Gossip Girl, except for a lot more sex and drugs. Like, all of these kids are just having sex with each other, cheating on each other, doing massive amounts of cocaine and drinking alcohol, and they're fucking 15 years old. Like, I was just disgusted and traumatized because I don't want to read about children fucking their lives up like this and have it read like there's no consequences. I mean, there are consequences. People are dying of like drug overdoses and stuff like that, but it reads more of like if you're rich enough you can get away with anything you want to, and it was gross and I didn't like it at all. Call me like an old prude, but not something that I wanted to really read about at all. The best part about this book was the ending, and not because it ended, that's a bad pun, but let's just say that I like books with really unhappy endings, and this had a really unhappy ending. And the final book that I read for the Asian Readathon was Night Tiger by Yangsze Choo. And this takes place in Malaysia in, I want to say the 1940s, but I'm not 100% sure on that. In the 1930s. This takes place in Malaysia in the 1930s, and I'm gonna say it's like fantasy into magical realism. There are 5 people who are connected together because they are named for the 5 Confucian virtues. So Confucius had 5 virtues, and their names are the same sounds as those virtues. And they don't really know that they're connected together. It's more of like a mystical connection. And there's like magical stuff. There's a ghost shifter tiger, and basically a Chinese superstition is if you die and all of your body parts are not put into the grave together, then you are not able to pass on. You have to have a completed body to pass on, and so you're like stuck as a ghost roaming the earth. And basically a young boy, his master has died, but he had a finger that was amputated years and years ago, and he needs to find this finger and put it in his master's grave before 48 days pass, or 49 days. I don't remember the exact number of days. And then the girl on the front is working at a dance hall to try to recoup her mother's gambling debts. She is a dance instructor, and the interesting thing about this is a dance instructor is sometimes akin to a prostitute. She specifically is not a prostitute. She only teaches dancing lessons, but a lot of the girls she works with are prostitutes, and she is treated like a prostitute. There's just nothing sexual going on. She like remains pure, which is important in the 1930s, not so much now. And it's the story of these 5 people coming together and like living out their mystical destiny. I personally just don't like Eastern fantasy. I have nothing against the culture, nothing like that. It's just, I was bored reading this. It just didn't really do much for me. The story was, I guess, sounded interesting. It didn't really sound interesting to me. I don't know. I just didn't like it. I didn't hate it, but it's not like I loved it, and it seemed to drag on a lot, and I didn't really care about any of the characters. So I'm sure there's a lot of people out there that would really like this. It just wasn't for me personally, which is fine. Not everybody has to like the same books. Finally, the last 2 books I read this month were actually read at the first of the month, or just the last on my list. But these were the second and third book in Diedra Drake's Cursed Elf series, I believe is the name of the series. And The third book came out at the beginning of this month, so I read both of these books, which I had gotten both of them as advanced reader copies, and kind of made an entire video about it. So if you want my opinions on these books, again, it'll be up in the cards and down in the description box. They are paranormal romance. If you like elves, Vikings, gods, specifically like Greek gods, you'll probably like this. There's a lot of drama. It's fun. It's not serious. I really, really enjoy all of these books. They're my guilty pleasure, even though I feel absolutely no guilt reading them. They're just a fun, wonderful little thing to read. So I highly recommend them. Support small authors. They're really good if you like paranormal romance. But that's everything I read this month. All 19 books. Comment down below if you've read any of these or have another book that you suggest that I read based off of what I've been talking about. And I'll see you in the next video.